Good morning, children. Welcome to my online class. Yesterday, we started the lesson the best Christmas uh, present in the world, and we have completed some paragraphs yesterday up to making peace. Right? Today, let us continue um, the lesson. Page number 11. Okay. You cannot, this was over, right? Yeah. Yeah. You cannot imagine, dearest Connie, my feelings as I looked into the eyes of the Fritz officer, who approached me, hand outstretched. Hans Wo, he said, gripping my hand warmly and holding it. I am from Dusseldorf. I play the cello in the orchestra. Happy Christmas. Captain Jim Macpherson, I replied, and a happy Christmas to you too. I'm a school teacher I'm a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Outstretched means extend gripping. Here, holding. Okay. Cello, a musical instrument like a large violin. He expresses how he felt in that moment is far beyond that can be expressed in words or imagined. He was overwhelmed as he looked straight in the eyes of the approaching German officer who extended his hand and introduced himself. His name was Hans Wolf and he belonged to a place named Dusseldorf. He told Jim that he played cello at the orchestra and then wished him Happy Christmas. Jim wished him back and introduced himself too by telling his full name, Captain Jim Macpherson. Both the soldiers they introduced themselves and they they both the parties now want peace. He told the German officer that he was a school teacher in Dorset, which is in the west of England. Hey, Dorset, he smiled. I know this place. I know it very well. We shared my rum ration and his excellent sausage. And we talked, Connie. How we talked. He spoke almost perfect English. But it turned out that he had never set foot in Dorset, never ever been to England. He had learned all he knew of England from school and from reading books in English. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy. His favorite book, Far from the Madding Crowd. So out there in no man's land, we talked of Bathsheba and Gabriel Oak and Sergeant Troy and Dorset. He had a wife and one son born just 6 months ago. As I looked about me, there were huddles of khaki and grey everywhere, all over no man's land, smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, eating. Hans Wolf and I shared what was left of your wonderful Christmas cake, Connie. He thought the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. I agreed. We agreed about everything, and he was my enemy. There never was a Christmas party like it, Connie. So, let's see these are the new words of this paragraph. Ration means the fixed amount of a commodity officially allowed to each person. We are also having ration, ration card. Bathsheba in the Bible, the mother of Solomon, also a character in the book. This is a this character comes in the Bible, and she is the mother of Solomon. Far from the madding crowd, Gabriel O, a character in the book Far from the Madding Crowd. Far from the Madding Crowd is a novel written by Thomas Hardy, and Gabriel Oak is one of the characters from this novel. Sergeant Troy, a character in the book Far from the Madding Crowd. This is also one of the characters from this book. Hurdles means crowd. Marzipan, this is a sweet, okay, sweet covering on a cake made from sugar, eggs and almonds. Hans expressed delightfulness upon hearing about Dorset. Both of them started chatting now. He revealed that he knows the place quite well, but it turned out that he had never visited this place or any other in England. He knew so much about England and all from school or English books that he read. Jim mentioned how they shared his quota of rum and Hunt's sausages. Jim's excitement about their conversation was clear from the letter. He revealed that they talked about Hunt's favorite author Thomas Hardy and his book Far from the Madding Crowd. He told Connie how they talked about the characters of the book like Bathsheba, Gabriel O, and Sergeant Troy. They talked about each other's families. Hans too was married with a 6 months old son. Then even shared the leftover cake that Jim's wife had made. Hans loved the marzipan and expressed it was the best he ever had. Jim was the same opinion. Jim mentions how they both agreed on everything despite being each other's enemy. He tells how he looked at the no man's land and could see men in grey and khaki enjoying themselves. They were smoking, eating, laughing, and drinking, and most of all, celebrating. Jim mentions how it was a very unique Christmas party. Then someone, I don't know who, brought out a football. Great coats were dumped in piles to make goalposts, and the next thing we knew it was Tommy against Fritz out in the middle of no man's land. No man's land means the land belongs to anyone, neither this party or that party. Hans Wolf and I looked on and cheered, clapping out our hands and stamping our feet to keep out the cold as much as anything. There was a moment when I noticed our breaths mingling in the air between us. He saw it too and smiled. Jim MacPherson, he said after a while, I think this is how we should resolve this war. A football match. No one dies in a football match. No children are orphaned. No wives become widows. So instead of doing war, one should have a match. In that, no one will die, no one will become orphan. Goal post means either of the two upright posts of a goal. Mingling means mix or cause to mix together. Jim mentions that someone who he does not know brought out a football, and next they know they were having a football match in the midst of the no man's land. This is the explanation of that paragraph. If you don't understand that paragraph, just read this summary, you will come to know. They used great coats to make the goal post. Hans and Jim only watched and cheered for the teams. They both of them were captains. They did not play, so they were watching. They clapped and stamped their feet to keep themselves warm also. Jim could ever notice their breath mixing up in the air. Hans noticed it too, and they both smiled at each other. After a while, Hans said that this is exactly how the despite should be resolved and not by war. In a football match, no one loses their life, no children are orphaned. Orphan means anath, and no wives become widows. I would prefer cricket, I told him. Then we Tommies would be sure of winning, probably. We laughed at that and together we watched the game. Sad to say, Connie, Fritz won. 2 goals to 1. But as Hans Wolf generously said, our goal was wider than theirs, so it was not quite fair. Jim replies to Hans' idea of resolving it with football by saying that he would rather suggest cricket because then there would be more chances of the Tommies winning. Do you know where cricket starts actually? From England. They both had a good laugh. Sadly, Jim informs that Fritz won the game by by 2 goals to 1. Hans generous as he was, remarked that it was because their goal was wider than that of Tommy's, which was a bit unfair. The time came, and all too soon, when the game was finished, the snaps and the rum and the sausage had long since run out, and we know it was all over. Whole day they celebrated Christmas by eating, drinking, dancing, and playing. I wished Hans well and told him I hoped he would see his family again soon, that the fighting would end and we could all go home. They ran out of rum, snaps, and sausages. The game was finished. Sooner than they realized, it all came to an end. Nobody wanted to quit now, but now everybody has to go. Jim gave Hans his best wishes and conveyed how he hoped for things to end soon and end well so that they could all go home and reunite with their families. I think that uh, I think that is what I think that is what every soldier wants on both sides. Hans Wolf said, "Take care, Jim Macpherson. I shall never forget this moment, nor you." He saluted and walked away from me slowly, unwillingly. I felt he turned to wave just once and then became one of the hundreds of grey coated men drifting back towards their trenches. Hans replied by saying that reuniting with their families and for things to end well is something that every soldier wants. He then wishes Jim well and expresses that he shall always remember that day, and so shall Jim. Hans went away after saluting in a slow pace and turned back only once to wave. Jim felt as if Hans was walking unwillingly, but soon he was one of the grey coated men who moved back to their trenches. That night, back in our dugouts, we heard them singing a carol and singing it quite beautifully. It was still night, a silent night. Our boys gave them a rousing chorus of while shepherds watched. We exchanged carols for a while and then we all fell silent. We had had our time of peace and goodwill, a time I will treasure as long as I live. Dugout means a shelter for soldiers made by digging a hole in the ground and covering it. Write all these new words in your notebook. As soon as they went back to their dugout shelters, they could hear the Germans singing a carol very melodiously. They sang Still Night or the Silent Night. Then their Tommies sang while shepherds watched. Just like this, they exchanged carols. Carols means songs that night, and after a while they were all silent because whole day they were busy in spending, celebrating this Christmas. Okay, Jim calls it the time of peace and goodwill and says how he will cherish it forever. Jim said, "I will remember all these things forever. Dearest Connie, by Christmas time next year, this war will be nothing but a distant and terrible memory. I know from all that happened today how much both armies long for peace. Now they are really tired of this war. They are longing for peace. We shall be together again soon. I am sure of it. Your loving Jim. So now, uh, since then, you are just reading a letter written by Jim to his wife Connie. Understood? Who is reading this lesson? Who is reading this letter? The narrator, the author, was reading that letter. It was found in that desk, roll top desk in that drawer. Got it? Right. After telling her about the amazing Christmas night, Jim tells Connie that things will settle soon, and by next Christmas, the war would just be a distant memory. He tells her that his experience was them has made him realize how both the sides crave for peace. Nobody wants now any war. They want only peace. He assures her that they will be reunited soon. He then signs off. The letter is finished here. I folded the letter again and slipped it carefully back into its envelope. The letter was there in the envelope. I kept awake all night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove into the Bridport just a few miles away. I asked a boy walking his dog where Copper Beaches was. House number 12 turned out to be nothing but a burned out shell, the roof gaping, the windows boarded up. I knocked at the house next door and asked if anyone knew the whereabouts of a Mrs. Macpherson. Oh, yes, said the old man in his. So, the author with that letter went to that address where Mrs. Macpherson is living, and he got one house, he got the address, and he asked that address near to the to her neighbor Slippers. He knew her well. A lovely old lady, he told me, a bit muddle-headed, but at her age she was entitled to be, wasn't she? 101 years old. So Mrs. Macpherson was 101 years old. Quite old lady she was. She had been in the house when it caught fire. No one really knew how the fire had started, but it could well have been candles. She used candles rather than electricity because uh, she always thought electricity was too expensive. She was not using electricity much. Instead, she was using candles. Maybe that is why the house may be burnt. The fireman had got her out just in time. She was in a nursing home now, he told me. Burlington House on the Dorchester Road on the other side of the town. So here the meanings are given: muddle headed, confused, boarded up. So write all these words in your notebook. After reading the letter, which he knew he should not have read in the first place, he placed it back neatly in the envelope. The narrator could not sleep that night, and the next morning he knew exactly what he had to do. So he drove to Bridport, which was just a few miles away from his place of residence. He asked a little boy who was walking his dog for directions to the Copper Beaches. He went there looking for the address mentioned on the letter. But house number 12 was all burned down. Its roof was all open and the windows were covered with boards for security. To enquire about the whereabouts of Mrs. Macpherson, he knocked at the house next door. The old man in the slippers knew the lady personally. He called her a lovely lady who stayed a bit confused most of the time, but he blamed it on her age, for she was 101 years old. Her house caught fire and she was saved by the fireman. The actual cause of the fire is not known, but people suspect it to be candles. I told you she is not using electricity. Instead, she was using candles. The old lady used a lot of candles as she thought electricity was too expensive. The old man told the narrator that she now lived in a nursing home named Burlington House on Dorchester Road, which is on the other side of the town. I found Burlington House nursing home easily enough. There were paper chains up in the hallway and a lighted Christmas tree stood in the corner with a lopsided angel on top. I said I was a friend come to visit Mrs. Macpherson to bring her a Christmas present. I could see through into the dining room where everyone was wearing a paper hat and singing. They were all celebrating Christmas. The matron had a hat on too and seemed happy enough to see me. She even offered me a mince pie, a cake, sweet. She walked me along the corridor. Mrs. Macpherson is not in with the other, she told me. She is rather confused today, so we thought it best if she had a good rest. She has no family, no one visits, so I am sure she will be only too pleased to see you. She took me into a conservatory with wicker chairs and potted plants all around and left me. So the author went to the nursing home where Mrs. Macpherson was there. So here the meanings are given. Write it in your notebook. He went to Burlington House Nursing Home, which he found quite easily. There were Christmas decorations all over. The hallway was decorated with paper chains all over, and at the end there was a Christmas tree with an a symmetrical angel on the top. He introduced himself as a friend of Mrs. Macpherson, who had come to give her a Christmas gift. He could see everyone at the dining hall. They were all singing and wore paper hats. The matron wore one such hat too. She was happy to see the narrator and even offered him a piece of mince pie. As she walks him through the corridor, she tells that Mrs. Macpherson does not get visitors often as she has no family. According to her, Mrs. Macpherson would be delighted to see him. She mentions that she is not celebrating today as she was a bit confused. So they thought it would be better for her to rest. She took him to a conservatory which had chairs made of wigs and potted plants. The old lady was sitting in a wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. She had silver white hair pinned into a wispy bun. She was gazing out at the garden. Hello, I said. She turned and looked up at me vacantly. Happy Christmas, Connie, I went on. I found this. I think it is yours. As I was speaking, her eyes never left my face. I opened the tin box and gave it to her. That was the moment her eyes lit up with recognition and her face became suffused with a sudden glow of happiness. I explained about the desk, about how I had found it, but I don't think she was listening. She was just looking at the letter which the author gave her, and she was so happy, and she was not listening what the author was talking to her. For a while she said nothing, but stroked the letter tenderly with her fingertips. She went on seeing the letter, and she was so happy. Okay, write all these new words in your notebook. Inside the conservatory sat an old lady in a wheelchair with her hands folded in her lap. Her white hair was tied in a neat bun. As she sat there, she was staring at the garden when he entered. So the author went to her and said hello. She turned her attention towards him as he continued wishing her happy Christmas and gave her the letter. She constantly looked at his face while he spoke. It was only when he handed her the tin box that her eyes became radiant due to immense happiness. After handing the tin box over to her, he explained the series of events that led him to the letter, but she did not listen to a word he said as she was filled with so much happiness. Nor did she say a word. She just sat there holding the letter in her hands with gentleness, kindness, and affection. Suddenly, she reached out and took my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. You told me you would come home by Christmas, dearest, she said, and here you are, the best Christmas present in the world. Come closer, Jim, dear, sit down. As he stood there silently, Connie moved and took his hand while her eyes were watery. She said that he had fulfilled his promise of being there by Christmas. She even said that he is the best Christmas present in the world. She then asked him to come near her and sit beside her. She called the author Jim. So I sat down beside her and she kissed my cheek. I read your letter so often, Jim, every day. I wanted to hear your voice in my head. It always made me feel you were with me, and now you are. Now you are back. You can read it to me yourself. Would you do that for me, Jim dear? I just want to hear your voice again. I would love that so much. And then perhaps we will have some tea. I have made you a nice Christmas cake, marzipan all around. I know how much you love marzipan. So she thought him as her husband. Actually, he did as she said. He went near her and sat down while she kissed him on his cheek. She told him how she read his letter daily, considering the author to be Jim. She thought author to be Jim, and it made her feel like she was with him. She longed to hear his voice, but then she mentioned how that he is here with her. He can read out the letter to her in his voice. She asked if he would do that for her. She explains that she just wants to hear his voice badly, and if he could do that for her, she would him that. Love that. She suggested that they can even have tea afterwards. She then told him that she even made his favorite Christmas cake with marzipan. She is well aware of how he loved marzipan. Thank you. Have a nice day.